We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
Good evening, folks. You're listening to the Hour of the Time. I'm William Cooper.
The chair is against the wall. The chair is against the wall. John has a long mustache. John has a long mustache. It's 12 o'clock, Americans, another day closer to victory. And for all of you out there on or behind the lines, this is your song.
Time, weather, and
Veteran of 3 foreign wars, entrepreneur, and warrior poet, Tony Arterburn takes on the issues facing our country, civilization, and planet. This is the Arterburn radio transmission.
Well, if you live long enough, you get to see some interesting headlines, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Arterburn radio transmission. I am your host, Tony Arterburn. I'm broadcasting from deep within the heart of Texas, live in Denison with Beans the Brave, just off camera here in my office. And I'm watching live. I'm watching Houston. He is looking at some gold, seeing if it's real, seeing if what the carat is. It's interesting. I got a big window here, so I'm watching all this happen. But I'm looking at that. I looked at the headlines just before I went live. I was pulling some links up, and I go to Drudge, and the headlines of Drudge right now in real time changed red, and it says Trump calls for Dems to be executed and to hang them. Now there's a lot of first here. I've never seen that kind of rhetoric come out of the White House before, and I can't through my Rolodex of history in my mind, I can't think of another time that language has ever been used. I know that there was an unmailed letter that Harry Truman had. He said we should hang some traitors and things. But he never mailed it. He just kept it in his desk. He would do that. He would write letters sometimes, and then he got into a fight with a verbal back and forth between the art critic or a entertainment critic who didn't like the way that his daughter Margaret was singing. And that was kind of an interesting back and forth, but nothing like this. This has never happened before. As a matter of fact, there's a couple articles I want to cover on this subject, and then the Senate vote for the release of the Epstein files that I found highly interesting. We're going to do a little bit of history today and things that I didn't know, and I actually did a little bit of research before the show and in conjunction with these articles, so we'll get to that. But it is the 20th of November, 2025, and I'm gonna talk about some gold analysis today as well. Stuff's going on with the Bitcoin market. I've got an opinion, if you can believe that. I've got an opinion about it, and I think this is one of those times in our lives when so many mixed signals are happening at once. It's the discernment is very important. The stillness, the ability for you to think through is going to be very important. So I'll see if I can conjure up a little bit of that spirit today here on the Arterburn radio transmission. All right, let's go to the first article I wanted to get to on gold. And I talked to Travis Knight this morning on the David Knight Show, and we had an interesting conversation. I mentioned before I left that interview about an article that's up on Drudge about The Economist magazine, and I want to talk about the cover of The Economist magazine in 2026. Today, there's an article by Michael Snyder, and we're going to get into that. But leading into the dystopic 2026 cover of The Economist. Let's talk about this article that's up on Kitco right now. And not that this is going to surprise you, but this is the trend, and this is where things are going. Kitco.com. China-led central bank gold buying spree could stress global markets. Robust physical demand for platinum and silver has highlighted the fragility of global supply chains. While the gold market has not seen the same kind of disruption, it may be immune to similar volatility, according to one investment bank. In their latest report, commodity analysts at Societe Generale said that they are closely watching official sector gold demand as they believe ongoing central bank purchases could lead to another short squeeze similar to what was seen in silver and platinum. Global central banks have increased their gold reserves by roughly 1,000 tons in each of the last 3 years, although demand is expected to be slightly weaker this year. The World Gold Council forecasts that the holdings could still rise as much as 950 tons, well above long-term averages. Well, this is important, folks, because a little bit of on-the-ground analysis, a little bit of open source intel, if you will, from your humble host. This gold's going somewhere. Like, we still sell gold at Wise Wolf. It's not like the good old days, though. It's not like the times that I had in 2021, 2022, where we were getting these large orders. We still get those sometimes, but it's not the norm. What you're watching is a transfer of wealth, and we're going to get to this in the Bitcoin analysis as well. But you're watching a transfer from the middle to upper middle class of average people, especially here in the United States, that have some savings, the baby boomer generation, and it's passing upwards, and it's going out of their hands through places like me, up to trading houses and wholesalers, and then on to central banks and multinational conglomerates and banking consortiums, and to places like China. So let's continue. Instead of our previous assumption of central banks selling U.S. assets and diverting a small proportion into gold, we could alternatively assume that central banks reallocate an additional 1% of their total reserves into gold and do not sell foreign assets, they said. China alone would require 276 tons alone, but if we sum all across countries represented, we arrive at a very significant 762 of total flows. See, what they're saying is China used to be the greatest holder of and buyer of U.S. treasuries, and now they're the greatest seller. There's been an inversion here. At the beginning of the 21st century, China started quietly buying, by the way, off the books, buying massive amounts of physical gold bullion. Now that correlates with China being giving most favored trading status by George W. Bush on December 11th, 2001, 90 days after 9/11. There was a lot of things that happened economically after that, right? We lost the 55,000 factories within a few years and 1 in 3 manufacturing jobs, all that stuff. I've talked about that before many, many, many times. But they started quietly buying. And for a while, there was this trade-off because they would buy our treasuries, right? We buy our treasuries, they use the dollar, so they're buying our debt. And this offloading of U.S. treasuries, which, by the way, more central banks hold more gold now than U.S. treasuries for the first time. And the same thing is happening with things like the euro with gold. Like the euro used to be the dollar, and then the euro that was number 2 most held central bank asset, and now it's gold. So gold supplanted the euro. It's one of the reasons why the Central Bank of Europe said that gold was a threat to the economic order. Although central bank demand remains robust, the World Gold Council notes that 66% of official purchases in the third quarter have gone unreported because central bank demands is often opaque. Analysts must estimate buying using a range of data sources. They buy secretly, folks. I remember a couple of years ago, I was covering an article on Zero Hedge, and they were trying to figure out what this whale had been buying massive amounts of physical gold bullion, not paper. So this was the first story, like whale is buying this. I mean, it was a massive amount. It was tons. And about 3 weeks later, they said, oh, by the way, that story of who that whale was, that was the Chinese government. They were buying secretly. If you look at, too, I've read articles from Kitco and the analysis on how much gold China actually has. And it could be upwards to 16,000 tons. We're supposed to have, which is funny because that's how much gold we had at the end of World War II. Now we're supposed to have like 8,500 tons. But, we never got that Fort Knox audit, which Fort Knox is supposed to have half of it. The rest of it's supposed to be spread across Federal Reserve branch. The Federal Reserve out of New York, the New York location. That's the plot to Die Hard with a Vengeance, I believe. That's what we're supposed to have. One of the most these are some of the most important stories that you're going to see anywhere. This is happening in real time. So I thought I'd bring this to your attention. The Chinese are buying, and other countries are buying too. A lot of it, that's a great word, it's opaque. Nobody knows exactly how these central banks they're not being transparent about it. We do know that central bank demand is high. But this is going to drive markets, I promise you. There is a squeeze that's going to happen. And it seems like it's plentiful, right? Because you're just, especially if you're in the business like I am, you're seeing so much of physical gold and silver, but it's flowing out. It's flowing out of your hands. It's flowing out of the people's hands into these soulless governments and corporations because they know what's coming. If you look at the actual markets, if you look at like what earnings are, what supposed wealth is, what equity is, you'll find that it's mostly garbage. And especially when things are based in a failing currency, you have a failing currency that's metastasizing. Its failures metastasizing into all markets, not just the dollar, folks. This is all currencies around the world. It's based off nothing. So you're pricing you're pricing assets, real assets, you're pricing equity in a failing currency, which is, you talk about a metric that's upside down. It's an inversion. It's like, how well is gold doing? It's like, no, the question you should be asking is, how bad is the dollar doing? The dollar's lost 50% of its purchasing power against gold in the last 12 months alone. All right, one more article on Kitco. I'll cover this really quick, and then I do this every week, and that's why there's almost no breaks and no plugging in the show, if you've noticed. We go from article to article, then I look up and I have 3 minutes left. All right, let's pull this up too. This was another important piece because it's parapolitics and precious metals, folks. I got to cover it all. All right. Silver faces fifth annual supply deficit as industrial demand slumps, but investment surges. This is the Silver Institute. A slowing economy is taking its toll on silver's industrial consumption, with demand expected to fall by 4%. However, demand won't fall enough to reset the current imbalance in the marketplace. Last week, the Silver Institute reiterated its outlook that silver will see its fifth annual supply deficit of 95 million ounces. Although the deficit is significantly less than last year's, analysts noted that it's still enough to support prices at record highs. Yeah, the year before it was 225 million ounce deficit, and I think the year before that it was 200 million ounce deficit. So I think the increase in prices over the last few years has spurred some more mining. And you got to remember, silver mining doesn't, like the new silver hitting the market doesn't come from like just a silver mining operation. Most of that is just ancillary. It's gold miners and copper miners and nickel miners that will go out and they'll get silver also. It's just like an also, an addition to. And so you'll see silver hitting the market. So there's not been enough mining to support the actual demand. Although silver has twice been unable to hold gains above $54 an ounce, the selling pressure has been limited. Spot silver last traded at $50.75 an ounce, and prices are up nearly 76% so far this year. Well, that's a good return. While industrial demand has been weak, the survey shows that investment demand has been more than made up for the drop. Philip Newman, managing director of Metals Focus, the British research firm behind the annual silver survey, said that inflows into exchange traded funds, and this is paper, folks. This is just demand into paper. Think about the actual physical, like the real physical silver demand and the movements between vaults. It's increased by 187 million ounces so far. That's the inflows. This reflects investors' concerns over stagflation, the Federal Reserve's independence, government debt, sustainability, the U.S. dollar's role as a safe haven, and geopolitical risk. Silver's exceptional price performance and its favorable supply-demand backdrop have further reinforced investor confidence. Looking beyond investment demand, industrial consumption is expected to fall to 665 million ounces this year, down 2% from last year. Well, these are all important metrics to watch. And again, I want to reiterate that silver, physical silver, is in very short supply. It's another aspect, and again, that they talked about in the gold article about silver and platinum and short squeeze and the actual paper markets. It was supposedly, hard to prove this, but supposedly for every 250 ounces that were traded in those ETFs and those paper markets, only 1 ounce existed in the real world of physical silver. And I've seen that in orders, and I've talked about this before. You know, and it's funny, there's archives and archives of people have been saying this for the longest time. So the entire time I've been alive, there's been a silver shortage because this was exposed in 1980 by the Hunt family in Texas. This was exposed to show not only the weakness of the dollar, but the limited supply of actual silver. And that's when the all-time high used to be $52.50 in 1980. And it stayed that way up until about a month and a half ago. So all that time. So nobody's, again, that had to do with cornering the market, had to do with physical silver deliveries, and there was a whole backstory there. But we've seen this disparity between paper markets and physical, real silver that exist. And now there is short squeezes and there's supply deficits and the physical demand that continues to go. That's why you have, hundreds of millions of, in the last 5 years, hundreds of millions of ounces that are missing from demand. So you have to take from the above ground supply. It was only a matter of time before you have weakness in the dollar and you have demand, and the market cap of silver is only like, I want to say it's 2.3 trillion or something. It's nothing compared to what the rest of the hundreds of trillions in supposed wealth in the global market. So silver has so much room to move, especially with the dollar doing so poorly. So these kind of stories where you just this is the tip of the iceberg, folks. I promise you, because as silver moves out of and it's being liquidated, it's moving into institutions. They're going to store that. It's not going to flood back on the market. That's going to be stored and borrowed against. Like, this is silver that's going to be stored for generations. Same thing with the gold. You think that gold is moving out of people's hands and out of smaller holders, and it's going up the chain, and then they're going to pull the reset lever. This stuff is only going to get more expensive over time, not only because of the weakening of the dollar, but because of actual scarcity. There's a reason they call it the Great Reset, and that you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. I don't know about the happy part. But they definitely want you to own nothing, no real assets. You could save your dollars. Notice there's no PSAs on keeping real money around. Like, doesn't the public service announcement doesn't come on and tell you, make sure you have a little bit of gold holdings. Hedge against it. Help your family hedge against inflation. No, they tell you to feed the pig. You go to feedthepig.org. Remember? Put in your piggy bank. Feed that pig. All right. Let's get into, I don't want to do politics, but this is a couple of these are harbinger stories. Okay. If you're like me and you've exited the political arena a while ago, I care about liberty. I care about sovereignty. I care about peace. I have ideals and I have values, and I stick to those things. I have a moral compass, at least I hope so. I have what I'd like to think of as ideological integrity. I think I do somewhere, right? But I'm not political, because partisanship and politics is where ideas and freedom go to die. It's where individualism goes to die. If you look at somebody who's partisan, where their team can do no wrong and the other team can do no right, I don't know what kind of world that is. I find that's what talk radio devolved into. That's why I got out of it. Like regular conservative talk, it used to be about ideas, especially in the 90s and the early 2000s. I thought it was a marketplace of ideas. It turned into Democrats bad, Republicans good, and that makes me want to have a real-time aneurysm on air. I cannot do that. It's so dumb, and it steals my soul. So partisanship and all the rest of that. I mean, again, if somebody does well in politics, I have to give them a thumbs up. I think that's a good idea. If they do bad, then I criticize them. That's way too nuanced. And you have to understand too, if you're in media and you've done radio, like I have for over a decade, and you've been, the circles, and you've been in politics and you've ran for office and all that stuff, the money that you can make. And that's why a lot of these bigger hosts and stuff, their audience is kind of like, it's almost like a reverse hostage situation where the audience holds you hostage, and because you have to tell them what they want to hear, or you're going to lose that market share. And luckily I never had to do that. It's not something I was ever interested in. Even when I started in radio, they thought they were getting I was a combat vet, so they thought they were going to get like a Dan Crenshaw, and here I'm playing Ron Paul clips and talking about bringing the troops home, and they are not going into Syria. Like that was a big topic back when I first started radio, and they couldn't believe I didn't want to get into a new war. So a lot of politics is, let's just, for lack of a better description, weapons grade stupid. Okay. But we're going to cover this a little bit. And I want to talk about the historical precedents here and why I'm calling it a harbinger. So if you watch the show, it comes out of the chaos in my mind. I might not even know what I'm going to talk about maybe 2 minutes before the show. But then I'll think of what's the most useful I take from the headlines, like running it through, like you can maybe run it through your AI, or if you run the headlines through my mind, this is what you get. You get art, you get the show. And so I try to talk about what's next, trends, things to watch out for, try to be useful, because if I'm just sitting here banging my fist on the desk telling you how stupid the left is, that show's been done very successfully, by the way. Those shows make lots of money and leave their viewers with no substance whatsoever. So I don't want to do that, and I'll forego the sponsors. Let's go to Zero Hedge. This, again, 2 stories that are going to sum up, I think, a great deal of what's to come. Zero Hedge. After flip-flopping tantrum, Trump signs bill to release the Epstein files. This is by Tyler Durden. It says, let's review. On the campaign trail, Trump promised to release the Epstein files, i.e. the list of powerful men who partook on Jeffrey Epstein's network of sex-trafficked young women. After a few months in office, a brave reporter asked Trump, hey, what about those Epstein files you promised? Which drew a hostile response from the commander-in-chief. Why are we still talking about that dead guy? Who cares anyway? That was the record needle scratch heard around the world, the vibe shift that split the base along weirdly partisan lines that seem to have, for some reason, pitted pro-Israel conservatives like Ted Cruz against America conservatives like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey, who have both vehemently pushed for the release of the Epstein files. Well, I can tell you why. Because Epstein was Mossad. It's pretty simple. And then all those people, like Ted Cruz said, why did Ted say he ran for office? He ran because he wanted to be Israel's man in the Senate, the most pro-Israel. That's what he said to Tucker Carlson. That's why he ran. Like, that's his raison d'etre, his existence, for his whole reason for being there. So that's why. And that filters down. Like, there's talking points and things you must do. After Trump's first tantrum at the journalists, which split the base, Pam Bondi insisted that she had the Epstein files on her desk and alluded to video evidence, only to release binders of old information to a group of conservative influencers. Somebody should have put quotations around conservative. And by the way, are you still a conservative in this timeline? Because what the hell are you conserving? What is there left to conserve? That's been the job of the so-called right. In a weird way, the left and progressives and the Luciferians move the ideological football, and then the job of the right is the conservatives is to conserve what they've changed. Notice nothing's ever rolled back. Over the last 2 weeks, things have gotten interesting. Democrats released a cache of Epstein emails mentioning Trump, which essentially established that Trump and the dead pedo were pals. Then House Republicans released a motherload of 20,000 documents from Epstein's estate, which, in addition to the Democrat release, paints the following picture. Trump and Epstein were pals. They had a falling out. Epstein then worked with Democrats and, oddly, his good friend Steve Bannon. Oh, by the way, Steve Bannon has over 15 hours of interviews, footage that no one's ever seen, of 2019 with Epstein. I pointed that out years ago. I'm like, does anybody realize that Steve Bannon did that? And then it's just never been a story. Weirdly enough, huh? That Epstein was arrested by Bill Barr, whose pedocentric father hired Epstein to teach at Dalton School and died in custody. See, that's another thing. What are the mathematical chances of that? Epstein's first job was to be hired by Bill Barr's father to work with kids. Bill Barr eventually would become the attorney general, not only for Trump, but would be attorney general for George H.W. Bush, who was former head of the CIA and ambassador to China. And then again, Bill Barr was the type of guy that would defend someone like Lon Haruchi, who shot Vicki Weaver in the head while she was holding her child at Ruby Ridge. This is the FBI, quote unquote sniper. A quick side note, there's some great operators out there that are actual snipers and people that are amazing. And then you hear people that like that, somebody that would shoot a mother holding her child on their own property. And then you wonder, would you even use that title? Would you want to be known as it? Because a lot of the fake vets are snipers. You know that? Everybody's a sniper. I always hear that a lot. I'm just, oh, you were? There's like 5 guys that were. It's not a big club. I mean, they get a sniper tab. That's pretty rare to even see. You got to be walking around Fort Bragg a while before you see one of those. Just so you know. Just when somebody says that, wonder if are you like Lon Haruchi, or are you fake, or are you an actual sniper? All right. Let me put this back on the screen. Actually, I wanted to, they changed StreamYard. I used to be able just to have a different view. I can't even do it anymore. Put this back up. Let's put the whole thing up. That said, it largely backfired on Democrats, as we learned. Stacey Plaskett was texting back and forth with Epstein during Michael Cohen's get Trump congressional testimony, right? This is, again, I read into this too. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries was hitting Epstein up for dinner and fundraising. Larry Summers, Bill Clinton's former Treasury Secretary and Harvard president, just went into hiding because Epstein was coaching him on how to cheat on his wife with the daughter of a former CCP official at Mente at Harvard. Like this Chinese Communist Party. Well, there's a lot here to unpack. So they released the files, but we already know this story. But I'm telling you, like, we know this story. But what's coming next? And I want to get to this. This is where I think this is the big story. This is where you want to see trends. I'm going to go to this article from Natural News. Let me stop this one and put this one up because I want to talk about this. This is something highly interesting. And I got to get through this because I want to get to this Michael Snyder article. See, I told you I picked too many articles to try to put enough into an actual hour of radio. Hold on. Let's put this up. This is, on the surface, you don't think much of this, folks, but let's really dig in here. This is naturalnews.com. Unanimous Senate sends Epstein files bill to Trump's desk. Congress passed a bill mandating the release of the Epstein files, sending the Epstein Files Transparency Act to President Trump's desk with overwhelming bipartisan support. The legislative process was unusually rapid, driven by a rare cross-party alliance in the House and the swift, unanimous mover in the Senate to bypass typical procedures. The bill compels the Department of Justice to declassify and release all records related to Jeffrey Epstein and his associates, which are believed to contain evidence that could implicate high-ranking officials. Trump's public reversal was a key trigger. After initial resistance from his administration, he posted on Truth Social, urging Republicans to vote for release of the files. The decision now rests with Trump, who faces immense political pressure to sign the bill, a move that would unlock documents with the potential for a significant political reckoning. Again, a stunning display of bipartisan unity. The U.S. Congress has thrust the long-secreted Jeffrey Epstein files into the spotlight, delivering legislation to President Donald Trump's desk. Well, I want to go back to that unanimous part, because if you want to cover trends, you want to know what's next and how big that is. I looked up, and maybe you can find it. I went on 2 different search engines because I'm a student of history, and I thought, when is the last time that the Senate actually voted unanimously? Because I know there was, even with like the Gulf War and 9/11, you go all the way back to World War I and II, you could have some dissent. I know Ron Paul dissented on the authorization for force after 9/11. He thought it should be properly, declared war, and he thought that there was some constitutional ways to, put out bounties and things like that. I mean, he just was trying to do it constitutionally. It wasn't necessarily like he didn't think there should be no response, but it needed to be constitutional. There, again, you went on 2 different search engines, and I put in the question, when are the times the Senate has voted unanimous in history? And it couldn't give me an answer. It just keeps bringing up both chambers of Congress overwhelmingly voted to pass a bill forcing the Justice Department to publicly release the files related to its investigation of convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. And this is how it goes all through the search history. Again, I could be wrong. I had a limited amount of time. But 3 different search engines returned the same thing. I can't think of off the top of my head. I know there's different, even Pearl Harbor, I think, had a dissent or like go back to the Senate voting to censure Joe McCarthy. And there's some senators that set out the vote, that abstained to vote, like John F. Kennedy would not vote yay or nay against Joe McCarthy because Bobby Kennedy had worked for Joe McCarthy. And of course, he worked with Roy Cohn, who was Trump's attorney. Right. There's all these little connecting dots here. But isn't that interesting? That's never happened that I know of. And again, 3 search engines, could be wrong, but that it seems that's about right. That would be, and it happened like that. This is political kryptonite. Like this is like there's something to this, and it's been building for all these years. That's why you open up the headlines of Drudge, and that's when I got, Trump calls for Dems to be executed, right? Like this is some melting down of the current thing that you thought you were watching. This is like the script change. It's like watching that movie, that Joaquin Phoenix movie, Eddington. Has anybody ever seen that? Whoa, man! You're watching you watching the show, and you think it's one thing, and it becomes something completely different and dark. And that's kind of what I think I'm watching here. It's like I thought I was following this and the progression of this pretty smoothly, but something is amiss. So something to be aware of. That's never happened before. All right, I want to go to the chat. Let's see if I've got everybody over on Rumble. You can follow the show over on the America Unplugged channel over on Rumble. Yeah, real Jason Barker says StreamYard changes have been driving me nuts. I know. I haven't had enough time to become reacquainted with everything that they changed and all the updates. So yeah, I'm with you, brother. So we got Harps over in the chat. It's good to see you guys. Sorry I wasn't able to make it last week. Let's see. We've got Dustin Helm. Howdy, Tony. Good to see you, Dustin. Always good to see your name in the chat, brother. And everybody over on YouTube. Yeah, Harp 666. Oh, look, it's got a scope. It's a sniper rifle, right? 150 yards. Snipers shoot from any distance and are trained to be stealth. That's true. Yeah, it annoys the crap out of me when people say they're snipers, right? Yeah. That's what I hear that a lot. I'm like, there's only like 5 of them. I mean, I'm being facetious, but just be wary of that kind of talk. All right. The Harp says, my anger, that's what I'm conserving. Yeah, you're conserving your own anger. All right, let's continue. I want to get to this article over on, this is Michael Snyder's article. And this is that talking about The Economist. I found some interesting history with this too. Let me put this up on the screen. I thought it was a great title. Now, this is the cover of The Economist, The World Ahead 2026. Super creepy. The World Ahead 2026 magazine cover published by The Economist shows they expect war, pestilence, and financial collapse next year. Well, that's what you're being primed for. We've been primed for so much of this stuff. If you even look pre-COVID 1984, like you go back to before 2020, you can see the priming. We've been primed for all of this stuff for decades. Just predictive programming, just sinking into your subconscious. There's one magazine that represents the interests of the global elite more than any other. It's known as The Economist. And each year it puts out an issue that is dedicated to what is coming in the year ahead. As we've seen so many times before, these issues tend to be alarmingly accurate. The reason why they are so accurate is because the ultra-wealthy elite have an enormous amount of influence over the course of human events. If they are absolutely determined to make something happen, there is a good chance that it's going to happen. Ominously, it appears that they are anticipating a great deal of global chaos in 2026. The Economist has been around since 1843, but it's never had a very large readership among the general population. Ultimately, it's a publication by the elite and for the elite. And let's look at that for a second, folks. Let's look at that year, 1843. So the Economist, and we're going to get to some ownership of The Economist, who's behind The Economist. And I used to subscribe to The Economist for a long time. I found it to be very globalist. I didn't think they had, I subscribed to Austrian economics and even economic nationalism, other things that, that's why you can read things like, Global Affairs or whatever, or the Council on Foreign Relations and Foreign Policy magazine, all the rest of that stuff. You can get into things like that, but you're just going to get the perspective of the global elite, or at least the planners. And I already pretty much know what that is, but it's good to every once in a while I go pick up an issue. But the interesting thing about that, let's look at some research. I just wanted to get some insight on these timelines. So 1843, The Economist magazine starts, and it's by the way, it emanates from the city of London, if you know anything about that. It's not just London itself, the city of London, the financial heart, the system. And so I just typed in, when did Karl Marx start working on the communist theory, the Communist Manifesto? Early 1840s. So right then, that's what I thought. It's about the same time that you get The Economist magazine. So just a little bit of side note history. That's where my brain went, because I looked at that. I go, that's interesting. 1843. That's about the same time Marx was working on the Communist Manifesto. Bingo. Communist Manifesto published in 1848. Let's see. Yeah, this is some of the ownership. Aside from the Agnelli family, smaller shareholders in the company include Cadbury, Rothschild, 21%, Schroeder, Leighton, and other family interests, as well as a number of staff and former staff shareholders. A board of trustees formally appoints the editor, who cannot be removed without its permission. The Economist Newspaper Limited is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Economist Group. Well, it's... all those publications, the CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, all that stuff, they have, overseers. This is a small group of people. And it's like when Hillary Clinton went to the Council on Foreign Relations, and she shows up, I think when she was running, this is the 2016 era. And she says, I sometimes I'll just show up because I want to know what to think. If you wanted to know what the global elite are thinking, this is the publication you need to be reading. And for the cover, the A World Ahead in 2026 issue is perhaps the most ominous that's ever been published. When you look at the cover, what stands out to you? To me, the fact that there are so many symbols relating to war really got my attention. Let's see. There is a huge red tank on one side of the cover and another huge red tank on the other side of the cover. At the top, there are several large missiles. Look, they're ready to be launched. And at the bottom, there are more large missiles. Also, right in the middle, we see two enormous swords that are crossed. This is clearly meant to symbolize war. I said on the show the other day, I don't know if they're still there. I mean, this is the swords, and I think they are. When you enter Baghdad, there's two the giant hands. Those were sculpted those are on scale. Those were Saddam Hussein's hands that held the swords. He put those in place as the entrance to Baghdad after the Iran-Iraq war, in which we gave Iraq a lot of chemical weapons and training and intelligence and other things. So just so you know. Obviously, they believe that war will continue to be a major theme in 2026, and it is something that I have been consistently warning about. Again, this is Michael Snyder. They also seem to think that certain individuals will continue to be major players in world affairs during the coming year. Vladimir Zelensky is clearly visible in the upper right-hand portion of the cover. Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Benjamin Netanyahu appear to be depicted on the left-hand portion of the cover. And just like last year, Donald Trump is right in the middle. On Monday, Trump refused to rule out the possibility of sending U.S. ground troops into Venezuela. Asked if he would rule out U.S. troops on the ground in Venezuela, Trump replied, "No, I don't rule out anything. I don't rule that out. We just have to take care of Venezuela," he added. "They dumped hundreds of thousands of people into our country from prisons." And Michael Snyder begins to say, "Personally, I think this is a trap." I mean, that's one way to put it. It's an absolutely unnecessary everything to do. But if we go to war with Venezuela, a large portion of our military forces will be tied up and our relations with the rest of the world will greatly suffer. And Trump is also suggesting that military strikes in Mexico and Colombia could be coming. President Trump hinted at being open to sending military strikes to Mexico and Colombia in order to stop drugs on Monday, sending chills across the region. The president made the comments during a press conference on Monday as he hosted a meeting with FIFA President Gianni Infantino at the White House. That's insane. We're just willy-nilly. I mean, read War is a Racket, folks. It's just Smedley Butler, most highly decorated Marine Corps general, I believe, of all time. It was the most highly decorated person, Marine, up until his death in 1941. He wrote that book, War is a Racket. And he said, I didn't go to South America on behalf of democracy. I went on behalf of the United Fruit Company. This is what Trump goes on to say, "Would I launch strikes on Mexico to stop drugs? It's okay with me. Whatever we have to do to stop drugs." Mexico, as I looked at Mexico City over the weekend, there's some big problems over there. If I had to, we would do what we've done to the waterways. I don't know. He's talking about where they blew up the boats. There's almost no drugs coming through our waterways anymore. It's down like 85%. Well, I do know those people trafficking children and drugs, and I want to know what happened to all those organized people in fatigues that I've seen on cameras numerous occasions, like on the southern border, terrorizing ranchers, and not only that, but the ecological damage that's been done by them. I don't think any of that is dissipated. But we have arrested some old cleaning ladies and things out of their homes. So congratulations. On the other side of the globe, I expect conflict between Israel and Iran to erupt again. Again, this is Michael Snyder. I expect the war in Ukraine to continue to escalate, and I will be watching China very, very closely. Getting back to the magazine cover, I also noticed that there is a chart that seems to depict some sort of financial crash right under the crossed swords. It's not too far below that chart. This is a red image of a broken dollar sign. It's an interesting thing about the dollar sign. The dollar sign used to have two slashes, and the two slashes were meant to represent the pillars inside King Solomon's temple, Jachin and Boaz. That's Isaac Newton studied this stuff, and it's very esoteric. It's like wisdom, strength and wisdom, all that. It's what the two pillars, and then the two slashes went through the S and the dollar. But then they just went to one. And did they do that when we went to fiat? Because it was kind of like a wink and a nod, like we're taking away the solemn part of that, or the trustability, or the traditional part of that. I'm not sure. Something for you to think. But that's the broken dollar sign sounds about right. In addition, throughout the bottom half of the graphic, it looks like paper currency is falling everywhere. Wow, he says. Obviously, they're trying to communicate something about the global economy, and it certainly isn't good. Will 2026 be a year of financial collapse? We won't have to wait long to find out. I also noticed 2 gigantic syringes near the bottom of the cover. Oh, goody. And throughout the cover, there are lots of pills floating around. I started to count them, but there were just too many. So what does this mean? Are they suggesting that another global pandemic is on the way? Will 2026 be a year when people are taking shots and pills to try to protect themselves from major pestilence that has broken out? Well, I don't think that shots and pills would be a good idea. Interestingly, or just maybe just turn off the television. If we do that last time, that should be your greatest inoculation from if like you just didn't have, if you didn't know that you're supposed to be very, very afraid in the fetal position, getting your $1,200 relief bucks, binging Netflix while your life burns down. If you didn't know you were supposed to do that. Ethiopia has confirmed an outbreak of deadly Marburg virus in the south of the country. Is that how you say that? Marburg? The African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said on Saturday, the Marburg virus is one of the deadliest known pathogens, like Ebola. Yeah, I mean, you hear this kind of stuff. These things get floated around. I was laughing to myself driving the other day thinking about, I went on the David Knight show. This guy's just been 4 years ago. The years kind of blend in together now, but I remember just laughing because they remember the different variants they would come up with, and finally they came up with Omicron. It was the Omicron variant. And I'm like, I went on the David Knight show and I was like, it reminds me of one of those old, like early 50s B movies when they'd be like, and it came from space. We've had some fun times. I looked over at this is a couple years ago, and I realized like 2020, I did a show every day. I did my daily show. And I looked over and I just saw all the notes and things and articles, and I've kept all of them. I should have just kept them in perpetuity and put them in storage because there's some great stories in there. Like the amount of psychological stress and damage that was done to our society and psychological war that was waged on us, the mind control, like it's enormous. Like that if you come out the other side of that and you can laugh at it and realize like just how nuts that was, then you're probably just one of God's people and he's protecting you if you can get through that. Because it would take God's protection to get you through that kind of mind control, or at least God's mercy. Michael Snyder says, personally, I'm convinced that pestilence will be a major theme in 2026. I hope that all of you have been getting ready for that, he says. Lastly, I wanted to mention the giant raised fist near the top of the cover. A raised fist has been primary symbol for resistance to the Trump administration. And I don't think that is an accident. This giant raised fist has been placed right in the top of the American flag in the graphic. Are the global elite planning civil unrest in major U.S. cities in 2026? We know they have been lavishly funding far-left protest groups in this country. They fund both. Can we be clear on that? They fund both. If you find, my son was asking me about a particular influencer yesterday. He said, what do you think about it? And I thought, well, I don't think that he helps. If you really get down to it, I think, know your history, know your philosophy, like your greatest minds of all time. They weren't extremists in some, and I know the Barry Goldwater quote, extremism in defense of liberty is no vice. And it isn't. I mean, in the sense of being someone who supports absolute rights, absolute speech, absolute God-given sovereignty over yourself. I think that makes you an extremist. I don't think that does. I'm talking about certain types of views, especially racial and other things that are fringe. You're against. I mean, you read Aristotle. And the Greeks had this idea, and this goes back to the Odyssey and even before written philosophy in the Greco-Roman tradition, was that idea of the golden mean. It's right down the middle. And it doesn't mean that you can't, you can see value from both ends or both sides and all around. And like Robert Kiyosaki says, he says the coin has three sides: it's heads, tails, and the side of the coin, the edge. So I think a lot of they fund both sides. I think you'll find that when this is all said and done, we're being manipulated. We're being pushed into pre-subscribed camps ideologically for our politics, for ourselves. And this is easy. It's easier to control us that way. Let's see, and go back to the article. Will 2026 be a year when mass protests against Trump go to the next level? Yeah, I think so. Michael Snyder's a bit of a Trump guy. Okay, it's fine. And he's asking good questions. So I think they fully intend to unleash chaos, and that fits perfectly with what I'm expecting too. Unfortunately for the elite, I do not believe they will be able to control the chaos that is coming. Well, I don't think they are either. I don't think they intend to control it. That's the thing about being the elite. You get to kind of walk through the raindrops, You got generational wealth. You can go anywhere you want. Nobody talks about Deagle anymore. Remember the Deagle report? It's 2025. It's not that far off. It's supposed to be 2025 by that time, but, we should talk about Deagle again. That should be brought back up. I remember I learned about that in 2018. Let's explore what this is. We really are right on the brink of a global nightmare, he says, and one that starts, and once it starts, nobody is going to be able to wake up from it. Well, only because we think it's so. And that's what predictive programming is all about. This doesn't have to be the world. We can literally not have it. But that's the current paradigm we live in, because we're giving external control to someone else. We think that's all external. But if you change, like Lao Tzu says, if you want to change the world, and I'm paraphrasing because there's 5 different layers to this quote, but this is what Lao Tzu said. It's basically you change the inner self. You change your inner world, you change your outer world. And that's, if we all started doing that, that's why as a broadcaster, I'm not going to come to you with it's not just doom and gloom. This is I think in the zeitgeist, which means the spirit of the age. So I'm showing you like a mirror. I think this is what I think the zeitgeist is, but it doesn't have to be. None of this stuff is what in Terminator, she carves out no fate. There is no fate but what we make. So I think all of this is intended, and they feed off this stuff, feed off of fear. What's the number one phrase in the whole Bible? Do you remember the number one phrase that's repeated over and over again? Be not afraid. So interesting warning signs. Good to know the signposts ahead, but it doesn't have to be the future. And if you know this, plan accordingly. That's what this show is for. All right, folks. I will see you next week. Actually, it's on Thanksgiving, so I don't know. Maybe I will. Maybe I'll do a Thanksgiving show. Okay, I'll try. And I might be having some turkey, and Beans will be here. So we'll see. I'd love to talk to all of you, and I hope you have if I don't, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Thanks always for being here. Arterburn.gold is the website. You can go there. Links to Wolfpack, subscription programs for precious metals. Get in on that. As Sam Tripoli, my friend, says, get in on the precious metals game. You can do that. Get physical precious metals delivered directly to your door. We'd love to buy your metals if you need to sell them, but don't give up your gold, silver, or your Bitcoin to the elites. That's what's happening right now. There's a big transfer of wealth happening, and it's not what it looks like. But don't do it easily. Don't go gentle to that good night, ladies and gents. America Unplugged on Saturday, 11 a.m. Central Time, 12 Eastern. Billy Ray Valentine, the legendary Don Jeffries. We'll see you then. You guys take care of each other. End of transmission.